The major accomplishment this week is getting through Tel Aviv Yafo in an hour. Major joke. You can't even get out of Tel Aviv on a Friday afternoon in an hour. You can't go anywhere. Okay. We can all see Lynn's wonderful artwork, the big red circle around Tel Aviv Yafo.
I have mad art skills. Okay?
And she loves that red marker. We're getting real good at it. At any rate, tonight we're obviously going to Tel Aviv, which is the largest and newest city in Israel, founded on a beach in 1909. Tel Aviv is a large, modern, cosmopolitan city. Yafo, sitting just south of Tel Aviv on the Mediterranean, is an older neighborhood, but as of late, it has really been regenerated as an old city, but with a whole bunch of new stuff. We'll get to that later. The cities are often talked about as one metropolitan area of Tel Aviv Yafo, with a population of 460,613, but who's counting? It's the economic and technological center of Israel. Yay! Ooh, look. Pretty aerial view of Tel Aviv. You might even be able to see some swimming pools on the top of some fancy hotels. I want to start us off with just a little bit of history about Tel Aviv Yafo. The modern city of Tel Aviv was founded, as mentioned before, in 1909 by the Yeshuv, the Jewish residents, as a modern housing estate on the outskirts of the ancient city of Yafo, then part of the Mutar Satrin Tefet of Jerusalem, the Ottoman Empire's ruling body there. The settlement was first called Ahuzat Bait. On April 11th, 1909, several dozen families gathered on the sand dunes on a beach outside of Yafo to allocate plots of land for a new neighborhood they called Ahuzat Bait, later to be known as Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv, Hill of Spring or Mound of Spring, Tel can be a hill or an archaeological mound. We'll get back to that later. As the families, there were several dozen families involved in this undertaking. They couldn't decide how to allocate the land. So, they held the lottery to ensure a fair division. Akiva Aryeh Weiss, chairperson of the lottery committee, and one of the prominent figures in the founding of the city, gathered 66 gray seashells and 66 white seashells. Weiss wrote the names of the participants on the white shells and the plots numbers on the gray shells. He paired the white shells with the gray ones, assigning each family a plot. So Tel Aviv's founding families began the first modern Hebrew city. Thank you, Lynn, for finding gray and white seashells. Ooh, we're getting good at this. The name Tel Aviv itself is an ironic label because Tel, as well as being a hill, can also be an archaeological dig site or something very old. So, and Aviv represents spring, which represents renewal. So, in essence, it is an old new place. Weird. Tel Aviv was the temporary capital of Israel after the proclamation of the country. Many foreign countries still recognize Tel Aviv as the capital of Israel. And still many diplomats as well as missions can be found in the city, although some are moving to Jerusalem. With a lot of the world debating over Jerusalem, partly due to the holy places, and it's being partly in Jordan from 1948 to 67, Tel Aviv grew in its importance. Tel Aviv is also important because of its access to the Mediterranean Sea and the Yarkon River, giving access to goods and materials for coming in and then being spread throughout most of the rest of the country. There's so much to do in Tel Aviv that tonight I want to just focus on some places I've been, tell you a few stories, and a few that I found where I haven't been that seem really interesting. We will be talking about the city of Tel Aviv proper and some of its suburbs, as well as the city of Yafo, part of the Tel Aviv-Yafo metropolitan area. Let's start with Tel Aviv itself. Most trips to Israel start with a night in a hotel in Tel Aviv. You get into the airport and everybody's exhausted. So many of the organized trips have you stay at a hotel along the beach. Many of the premier hotels in Tel Aviv are along the beach and the Mediterranean. Oh, and I think, Lynn got a picture of the Ritz-Carlton. I think that's where I stayed with my group when I went last time. I don't know how Lynn did that. She's been reading my mind lately. Last time I was on an organized trip to Israel, which was my synagogue trip from New Jersey, we spent the first night at a beach hotel in Tel Aviv. I think it was the Ritz-Carlton. I'm not sure. I was a little bit tired, but not tired enough to actually go to sleep. So I grabbed a friend and I was able to walk along the boardwalk next to the sea for several miles up the strips of hotels and back down almost to the border of Yafo. Even in February, it was a beautiful walk, even at night, and there were lots of people out and several little spots open for coffee and snacks. On this trip with my synagogue from New Jersey, we went several places in Tel Aviv that I didn't remember visiting before. Okay, switching slides. One of them was the Haganah Museum. The Haganah was the precursor of the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, the Israeli army. The museum is located in the house of Eliyahu Golom, founder of the Haganah and its uncrowned military commander. The house was built in 1923. So you see the house, and was used as the Haganah's secret headquarters. Once the stake was established, Haganah members decided to convert the house into a museum, which would showcase the organization's story. The museum includes the original facade of the house and 2 more rooms that have been preserved as they would have been used for meetings by the Haganah High Command and leaders of the Yishuv. The museum also includes 3 floors of innovative display with films and exhibits that illustrate the story of the Jewish settlement under the British mandate and how the existence of the settlement was defended. As I remember, we got through a little bit of the museum, but the tour group I was on didn't leave nearly enough time. Someday I really want to go back and spend more time there. Fascinating museum, especially for somebody who loves history like I do. Another site we visited in Tel Aviv, find Herzl, is Independence Hall. Originally, the building was the Diesenguff House, and it's the site of the signing of Israel's Declaration of Independence. If you look up on the wall there, you'll see Herzl and pictures of the people who signed the declaration. Probably see Bengharian and Golda sitting there. Oh, Lynn's great with her red arrows. Picture of Golda. Mayor. Well, what other Golda was there? Yeah, there's Golda. David Bengharian speaking, Golda Meir sitting down listening, probably taking notes considering she's the only woman in the room. Just an aside. The Independence Hall is located on the historic Rothschild Boulevard from 1932 to 1971. It housed the Tel Aviv Museum of Art. It is currently a museum dedicated to the signing of Israel's Declaration of Independence and the history of Tel Aviv. Of course, it's hard to visit Tel Aviv without going to the beach. So we're going to go to the beach, right, Glenn? Yay, we're going to the beach. One of these days, Lynn and I are going to take a field trip and go to a beach. And it is not the Jersey Shore. There are many beaches to choose from. Some connected to the hotels and some which are public. Among them are Tayelet, Frischman Beach, Jerusalem Beach, Bograsha Beach, and Mitzid Zim Beach. Now for some strolling around what is undoubtedly the busiest city in Israel. So how about some recreation? We will now visit Diesenguff Street. And some of this information I didn't know before. It was named after the first mayor of Tel Aviv, Meir Diesenguff. It is one of Tel Aviv's most iconic streets. Some of you may have even been there, trying to make your way through the crowds. Originally described as the Champs-Élysées. Champs-Élysées is the main boulevard in Paris, for those of you who don't know. It has been described as the Champs-Élysées of Tel Aviv. Diesenguff Street declined after the 1970s, but the opening of Tel Aviv's most significant shopping mall, the Diesenguff Center, in the southern portion of the street in recent years, has brought a revival to Diesenguff, with cafes and restaurants, boutiques, clothing stores, and numerous design shops opening. Oh, Kim. It says my husband Joe. Hi, Joe.
Hi.
My husband Joe describes Tel Aviv, partly, I think, for the hustle and bustle of the city, like a trip to New York City and Miami all shoved into one, but with a definitely Israeli flair.
Yep.
But absolutely no lines, just big masses of people trying to get in places. That's the Israeli flair. Diesenguff Street runs through Tel Aviv from the port in the north, about 3 kilometers southward, to its end at Ibn Gibriel Street, near Chen Boulevard and the Habima Cultural Center. The street runs through the old north of the city, right into Lev Ha'ir, the center of town. Diesenguff Street and those surrounding it feature some of Tel Aviv's iconic Bauhaus building. Excuse me. Is that, we have Bauhaus? Is that Bauhaus? Okay. Bauhaus buildings?
No, we got it.
Okay. I have a slight flair for architecture, which have given Tel Aviv the nickname, the White City. And you can see some of the white buildings here. Habima Square is a popular public space located right in the center of Tel Aviv at the intersection of the two busiest and most popular streets, Diesenguff Street and Rothschild Boulevard. The square itself is home to a number of cultural institutions, such as the Habima Theater, the Cultural Palace, Heichal HaTarbut, and the Helena Rubinstein Pavilion for contemporary art. Okay. Given the square's central location, visitors have plenty of choices for great eateries and entertainment within walking distance. The cornerstone of the Habima Theater was laid in 1935, but it took more than 2 decades to finish the plan of the buildings around the square. Habima is the National Theater of Israel. The Habima Theater Group, housed in the Habima Theater, started in Bialystok, Russia, and Poland in 1912 by Nachum Zemach. The troupe traveled in 1913 to Vienna, where it staged Hear, O Israel, before the 11th Zionist Congress. What you need to know about Habima is that their mission was to stage plays in Hebrew, which they did. In 1917, after World War I caused the ensemble to dissolve, Zemach established a group in Moscow calling it Habima. In 1918, it started operating under the auspices of the Moscow Art Theater, which some consider its actual beginnings. The famous director, later to defect to the US, Stanislavski, arranged for the mainly Jewish Polish actors to be trained, and Stanislavski's method was a realistic method. You really had to be the part. A lot of American actors were trained under him. Joseph Stalin, believe it or not, authorized the theater's creation, which is hard to believe considering his track record with Jews later on. The troupe toured Europe and the US in 1926. However, as I said, Stalin's Russia was not a great place for Jews, so members of the company took it to its new home in the British Mandate of Palestine in 1928. During the 1928-29 season, they presented 2 plays. The first, Ha'otzar, the treasure, a translation into Hebrew of a Sholom Aleichem Yiddish play, Der Oyster. The second play, which premiered on May 23, 1929 in Tel Aviv, was Keter David, David's Crown, an adaptation by the Hebrew writer Isaac Lamdan of The Hair of Absalom by the 17th century Spanish dramatist Calderon. Anyone wanting information on Calderon, you have the opportunity to look it up yourself, or maybe Isaac might have more information than I do. The Habima Company finally settled in Palestine in 1931. In 1945, it built a theater in Tel Aviv. Habima has been considered the National Theater of Israel since 1958. Let's get back to Habima Square and visit a few more places. First, the Heichal HaTarbut, the concert destination. It is home to Israel's Philharmonic and was designed for great acoustics. Not an easy task while taking into account the shape of the place, as you can see. That the roofing and the slope and the audience are not great acoustically. The other spot we will visit on Habima Square is the Helena Rubinstein Pavilion of Contemporary Art. Yes, it is named for the iconic woman, Jewish woman, Helena Rubinstein, in the cosmetic industry. She donated generously towards the construction of the building, and it was opened in 1959. As you can see, the contemporary art is not only sculptural, but murals and lots of paintings. Very interesting. I've never been there. Another place in Tel Aviv I'd like to go. Before we leave downtown Tel Aviv, I think a visit to Diesenguff Square would be fun. It is also called Diesenguff Circus, sort of like Piccadilly Circus. It is one of Tel Aviv's iconic public spaces on the corner of Diesenguff Street, Rains Street, and Pinsker Street. It is one of the city's main squares, built in 1934 and inaugurated in 1938. One of the outstanding parts of the square is a beautiful fountain found in the middle of it. I don't remember the fountain, but I guess I went by it. Before we leave Tel Aviv proper, one more stop would be fun. Now, I agree the bus terminals are not really fun, but this one, known as the new Central Bus Station, opened in August of 1993, and it is the second largest bus station in the world. You can get anywhere in Israel starting there. I have to admit, I've gotten lost in that bus terminal several times, trying to find the correct bus out. Anybody hungry after all that traveling around? A great place to stop is Tel Aviv's most famous and central market, the Shuk HaCarmel. It is excuse me. It is the most visited market by tourists. The Shuk runs along HaCarmel Street from Allenby Street, major street in Tel Aviv, named for a British officer, toward the beach, ending at a park near the Intercontinental Hotel, one of the least attractive hotels, I think, in Tel Aviv. When I was in Tel Aviv in 1970, visiting my childhood friend Steve, who was studying at Tel Aviv Medical School, we went to a movie and then grabbed a bite to eat. And I really can't remember if we got it at a small shop at the bus terminal or at the shuk. I was going back to Jerusalem. He had to go back to campus. And either place, either the shuk or the bus terminal, would have met our budgets at the time. Needless to say that our pocketbooks were a little sparse. One of my most vivid memories of that quick dinner was my friend Steve saying to me, "Sandy, no, don't get the steak Laban." Little did I know at age 20 that one could actually order pork in Israel. Okay, a short stop just south of Tel Aviv is Yafo, which is the southern and oldest part of Tel Aviv. It is an ancient port city and famous for its biblical association with the story of Jonah. Remember the guy with the big fish? There are old narrow streets and courtyards to be explored, as well as the famous Yafo flea market. And as you can see, you can buy a lot more than fleas there. Yafo is mostly populated by Arabs, but it is still an interesting place to explore. The Yafo Artist Colony is housed in a renovated ancient part of the city adjacent to the port of Jaffa. And I sort of remember kind of going into the artist colony, realizing that my pocketbook wouldn't accommodate anything and leaving. Oh, well, maybe someday I'll get back to Israel with a bit more in my pocketbook. Okay. We're going to go a little bit out of Tel Aviv into Ramat Aviv, which is a suburb just north. Tel Aviv University is a public research university in Tel Aviv and Ramat Aviv with over 30,000 students. It is the largest university in the country. Located in Northwest Tel Aviv, the university is the center of teaching and research for the city, comprising 9 faculties, 17 teaching hospitals, 18 performing arts centers, 27 schools, 106 departments, 340 research centers, and 400 laboratories. The Department of Archaeology was in charge of my dig site at Tel Sheva. It was the second year of that the archaeology department at Tel Aviv University was digging there. And it was at its beginnings under the esteemed professor and archaeologist Aharoni, whom I had the pleasure of meeting. Not easy to follow, but got a lot out of him. My first 2 weeks of my dig experience were doing classes with him at Tel Aviv University. We had to read through the textbook like it's record speed at night and follow his lectures. Obviously, English was not his first language. Somehow he got his point across. Housed on the campus of Tel Aviv University and accessed from the Ramat Aviv entrance, gate number 2, Matiyah Gate, is Beit Hatfutzot, the Diaspora Museum. I have to admit, this is one of my favorite places in Tel Aviv. However, it is hard to find. I can attest to that, having got off at the central bus station and spent an hour and a half trying to locate it. I asked a lot of people where it was, and nobody could tell me. Finally, somebody told me it was on the campus. I got to the campus and asked around for at least a half an hour more. Got there, but it was worth the day. They had to kick me out literally at closing time. I was asked to leave several times. But I have to look at this, I have to look at that. Beth Hafutzot tells the ongoing extraordinary story of the Jewish people in exile from Israel. I especially like some of their more modern exhibits. They start way back at the beginning of the exile. There was I kind of got stuck on the exhibit on Leonard Bernstein because big Bernstein fan. And then the last exhibit I was in, and they literally had to kick me out kicking and screaming, which I found very interesting, was a diorama of Beth Sholom Synagogue in Elkins Park, Pennsylvania. For those of you that don't know, yay, there's two of us here from Philly, and we've been there, we've been inside.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was there for a cousin. You were there, or maybe you weren't. I don't know. I was there for a cousin's bat mitzvah. However, being gaga on architecture, I can tell you this is the only Frank Lloyd Wright synagogue ever built. And I have a personal connection to the synagogue. Not only were my parents members of it before it moved into these new fancy gigs, but my grandfather, my dad's father, Joe Krasnov, was president of the synagogue when the land was purchased to build the new synagogue in the suburbs. And when I went to the bat mitzvah there, I saw my grandfather's picture up on the wall with a small explanation. It made me very proud. Yay, go Grandpa Joe. Anyway, I guess we got to leave Elkins Park. We're going to go back to, yeah, yeah, we're going to go back to outside of Tel Aviv. We're going to go to Telesho Man Hospital. God willing, none of you will ever have to spend time there, but you can. I have spent time there, not for myself, but a friend of mine in Jerusalem had been horribly injured in a motorcycle accident and was taken to Telesho Man and had to stay there for a long time. He was recuperating. He was in the ward, and then he was in rehab. And we visited over one Shabbat. It might have even been over Tisha B'Av because I remember us not eating. But there actually was a place where people can stay, sort of like a hotel attached to the hospital, where we were able to stay overnight and visit him over the course of a weekend. It was on that trip that I had the notorious incident of turning down the wrong hallway and being met with a bunch of the Israeli army guys telling me I was in the wrong hallway. Sharon was down the hall. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I had a couple guns put in my face. What are you doing here? Oops, wrong hallway. Telesho Man is a premier and one of the largest hospitals in Israel. Located in Ramat Gan, suburban Tel Aviv, it was founded in a cluster of abandoned military barracks from the British Mandate era and originally known as Army Hospital Number 5. guess it was the fifth one built. Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion had it renamed Telesho Man Hospital, Guardian Hill. In 1953, it became a civilian hospital. I didn't realize that it took that long for it to become a civilian hospital. The rest of the time, it was still a military hospital. And Dr. Chaim Shiba, its director. It is now known as the Chaim Shiba Medical Center at Telesho Man. In 2021, it was ranked as the 10th best hospital in the world, scoring highest for an Israeli hospital. Shiba includes an acute hospital, a rehabilitation hospital, one of the largest rehab hospitals in the world, a women's hospital, a children's hospital, an eating disorders clinic, which I did not know about, a PTSD clinic for soldiers, a laboratory division, an outpatient clinic, and an academic campus. So it's also a teaching hospital. Before leaving Tel Aviv, a trip to the town of Lod would be appropriate. The city of Lod is estimated to have existed since 5600 BCE. However, in modern times, Lod has turned into a major Israeli transportation hub with an important railway, a rail junction, but principally the Bengharian Airport, the largest and only inter-country airport in Israel. From 1918 to 1948, Lod, or Lida, was ruled by the British Mandate government. They built an airport that was renamed Ben-Gurion after the death of Israel's first prime minister in 1973. Have to admit, I have spent a whole bunch of time, many hours waiting for planes, eating, sleeping uncomfortably, of course. It's very hard to sleep in a chair, on a bench. The benches there are very hard. And socializing with total strangers. An experience in Ben-Gurion, which is not hard to do. But, you know, Ben-Gurion is unusual because leaving, they ask you all kinds of questions. Where are you going? Where are you staying? Who are you staying with? Because, you know, Israeli security is very, very hard. I had a really nice woman one time I was there. It was the last time I was there. And she asked me, you know, where are you staying? And I told her I was staying with my son, in Goldberg, and I was going to stay on this place in this street. That was his apartment. And why are you coming? I looked up. I just want to see my granddaughter. I want to see my Meirab and my Tehillah. Well, on my way back into the airport, 3 weeks later, a woman going off duty waves to me and says, "How are your granddaughters?" I couldn't believe the same agent recognized me and remembered that I was visiting my grandkids. Israel, although, you know, a country the size of New Jersey, there are a lot of coincidences that happen. I mean, this woman remembered me. I mean, she must have seen at least, you know, thousands of people between the time I got there and the time I left. And she remembered to ask me about my grandkids,
That's funny.
which is really wild. 7:43.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. We went through Tel Aviv rather quickly. I can tell you, Tel Aviv is not my favorite place. I don't, if I wanted hustle bustle, I'd go back to New York or to LA to visit. Okay, and now I know people in LA I can visit. Sorry. But I have found over the years that Tel Aviv has grown on me. I've had experiences there that I wouldn't have had if I didn't know people in Israel, but I've also explored parts of Tel Aviv that I wouldn't have explored if I had just been on a trip. I actually took the bus into Tel Aviv and then wandered around and found the museum, which I love and I need to get Joe to. I had to finish the museum. I ended up almost at the end and I need to finish it. But there are so many other wonderful art museums and places to go in Tel Aviv. And I don't think I ever gave Yafo enough time. And I'd love to wander around there and, maybe sit at a cafe. I want to just end tonight with a reminiscence that I didn't write down and it came to me afterwards. My parents had friends. I don't know where they met them, but they were old-time residents of Tel Aviv, going back to when there were no ordinances that you couldn't pick up findings. They had a house full of archaeological tidbits. Mm-hmm. Their names were the Berliners. They lived in this little teeny tiny apartment in Tel Aviv. And my first trip to Israel, I think I went to visit them. We had like a weekend off from pilgrimage, but you had to have a sign note and say where you were going. And I found them, they picked me up, I think, bus station or something like that. Had me at their house, which literally looked like a wing of the museum in Jerusalem. They had all these little artifacts and they told me about each one of them and where they got them on the beach. And that is the real tenor of Tel Aviv. Old time Tel Aviv was, although it was a big city, it was a lot of little small towns, little small neighborhoods. I'm pretty sure that if you talk to Ruti, Karen, she could tell you that everybody knew everybody and everybody knew everybody's business. And everybody knew exactly how many eggs you had on Shabbos. And, for a big town, it was a bunch of small neighborhoods, which for those of us from Philadelphia know that that's true of a lot of big cities. Philly is a connection of a lot of little neighborhoods. Lynn and I reminisce in the fact that we were actually born in the same neighborhood, 10 years apart. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, we don't say we're from Philadelphia, we say what neighborhood.
What neighborhood you from? Mm-hmm. At any rate, if anybody has any reminiscences of Tel Aviv that you want to share, otherwise, next week we're gonna get holy. Next week we are going to 4 holy cities. The 4 holy cities in Israel, one of which I have not been to and don't plan to go to. The cities are Hebron. We're going back to Sfat, back to Tiberias, and then we will end fittingly right before Pesach in Yerushalayim.
Where? I never heard of that.
So that at the end of next week, we can proudly say, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. I mean it, God willing.